right, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today, I have a special guest. His name is Frank Cowell. Frank's owned a digital marketing company for the last 15 years called Digitopia. Frank's also responsible for several different books. His last one is Building Your Digital Utopia, How to Create Digital Brand Experiences that Systematically Accelerate Growth, and also building the Digital Utopia podcast. Thanks for being on here today, my man.
Sheldon, thanks for having me. I'm excited to jump into this.
You bet. So, Frank, a couple of things is knowing that you've owned a digital agency and stuff like that, knowing that you spoke on some of the world's biggest stages. First thing I'd like to know is just how do you calm your nerves before walking into a big presentation or walking onto the stage?
You know, it's funny you asked that. We were doing a podcast episode yesterday. We were recording it. And after that episode, we got into a conversation with our CMO, and that very thing came up. You know, I had an opportunity to share, you know, my philosophy, my mindset that goes into not only speaking on stage or, you know, talking on podcast interviews, webinars, but also if you're just doing email marketing. And my mindset is that I aim to be every bit of who I am. If you and I were just sitting down and having a beer together, like I just aim to be that person in those formats. And I don't try to be somebody else. And I think the problem people have when it comes to public speaking, specifically since you asked, is they feel like they have to rehearse something and memorize something. And essentially what they're trying to do, and they don't realize it, is they're trying to become an actor. And acting is a talent unto itself. Just like any skill, takes many years of practice and trying to see what works and what doesn't work, finding your style. And so if you're not a skilled, trained actor who's committed to doing this all the time, it's going to look like bad acting. And so that difference in what you want to be and what you're not in terms of this acting creates tension, it creates fear, and people don't like it. But for me, I've always just felt like I just have to go and be every bit of who I am. The guy you're going to have a beer with after I'm done with the talk, it's the same guy that's on stage. So, you know, when you're doing things like that, whether it's email marketing or webinars or speaking on stage, you sometimes have to amp up a bit of your personality. You have to kind of exaggerate it just a bit, but it certainly isn't trying to be somebody you're not. And the reason you have to kind of do that is so that way your personality comes through, right? Whatever it is about you that's interesting or unique, the languaging patterns that you use and your physical mannerisms, your philosophical viewpoints, those need to come through. And so I'm just very comfortable because, you know, I'm just going to go be the guy I always am.
And I think that's so key, right? When you try to be someone different, you lose that authenticity, right? And especially, you know, might not notice it from stage, but like you said, when you're having a beer with them afterwards, you're like, wait a minute, your message doesn't match what you're purveying now, right? And I've seen that with so many people.
Yeah, people are just, in general in life, way too concerned about what people are thinking about them in any given moment. And that is, you know, that's a cancer. That's something that will erode many different things you're trying to attempt to do in life, whether it's public speaking or grow a business or, you know, compete in some sort of physical activity. If you're worried about what people think, first of all, it's not even real. Most people aren't thinking about you. And two, it has nothing to do with what you're capable of in that moment and your full expression of that. It has nothing to do. There's no bearing, there's no influence, there's no outcome, but your brain makes it so, and your brain gets in the way.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because it's just limiting beliefs at the end of the day that hold us back from really connecting that way, right? And people are too busy. Absolutely. What I've found is people are too busy worrying about themselves to ever really worry about someone else, right? So take it to heart. And if you're waiting to do something, just do it today for the fear of like rejection. Just handle that today, right?
Yeah, the easiest way for people to get started public speaking, if you really want to do it and you just need to find a bridge to doing it, the easiest way. So if you're going to do a webinar, let's say right now, virtual's, you know, what's happening quite a bit. People aren't doing live events as much right now. the easiest way is to get someone who you admire and respect and ask them to interview you. And so this way you can just respond to questions and you know what the questions are in advance. So that's one way to get started. And then just answer those questions very raw, very real. Like, don't prepare too much. Don't memorize answers. The other easy way to do that is look for panels to join. So if you can be on a panel, you don't have to carry the load, right? You're not carrying the load of playing MC or being the only person on stage. So panels are a great way to start getting practice as a public speaker. So either have someone interview you, doing webinar, online stuff, or if you're going to do live stuff, a great way is panels. It makes it really easy.
Those are great tips, especially to boost someone's confidence as well, right? To maybe get to do a keynote speaker or just to feel confident just by speaking by yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I love those tips for sure, that they're just key. Like I said, the best thing that I like to do as well, even before a podcast, before coming, is just take a couple of deep breaths, right? It's so amazing what a couple of deep breaths will actually do for your physical realm. I want to say, I lost the word, but it just relaxes everything. You fill your body with oxygen and you're just allowed to move forward, right?
That and posture, right? So I forget, there's this TED Talk, it's a really popular one. I forget the woman's name. So I apologize to her, whoever she is, but she's got this really great talk on posture and how you carry your posture before an event, before a talk, before an important meeting is really important. And so, if you pay attention to your body language, you make sure you stand straight up and you put a lot of pride in your physicality and you stand there with strength and you stand there almost as if you're a superhero, right? And you do that and you take the deep breaths for a few moments before you go on stage or what have you. That does wonders for how you're going to come across to your audience.
Great tip. Absolutely. Just that self-confidence aspect, right? When you're standing tall, when your shoulders are back, you have that confidence aspect about you, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that you have to believe in yourself before you believe in anyone or anything else. And this is all cliche stuff, but it's so true. I mean, if you don't feel like in your mind that you're the man, you're the woman, you're it, that's going to come through in a lack of confidence. And, as humans, we're really good at like sniffing those things out. You ever interviewed somebody for a job and you can just tell
the BS meter is ringing, isn't it?
The person across from you doesn't match the resume, or vice versa if those tables are flipped, or if you have someone who's speaking on stage and you could just tell. And so as humans, we're really good at sniffing that out. And so more so what needs to be worked on for people who want to speak and present in big formats and in big ways is just working on upstairs. And what's happening up here is really what's most important.
Yeah, mind shift and mental fortitude is so important in business and in all aspects of life, right? And kind of leads me into the next question. You've obviously been in business for 15 years. You've done a lot of these. I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of these as well. But what are key points, or what makes a good elevator pitch?
One of the, I think, best formats I've seen is I'm a huge fan of Donald Miller's story brand framework, right? Creating that really ultra short value proposition, and ultimately what you need to touch on is, here's who we're for, here's the outcome we bring, and here's kind of what's required to make that happen. Just those 3 points, if you can hit on those and make that extremely compelling to where the person hearing that says, if they're the right audience, if they heard it, they would say, tell me more. How do you do that? If you can get them to go, how do you do that? Then you're on to something intriguing. But if you say it and they're like, oh, that's cool, and they kind of just like, that's it, then you haven't hit on it, right? So it's who you're for, the outcome you bring, and kind of what's required. What's the exchange, Right. And so, someone might say, hey, we help farmers, grow their best crops with half the labor in half the time. You would go, if you're a farmer, right? You'd be like, wait a second, stop. Who are you? And I have to know more, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So that's a quick elevator pitch / value proposition that becomes irresistible if your target audience were to hear it.
Absolutely. Now, one of the big components to any content is really 1-minute videos. And I know that, some of these things can be broken down into those short pieces of content as well. But why are they so important for businesses to be able to provide value in that short period of time?
Well, one, we just live in a world where, the thumb controls everything. You're just scroll. So people are really in a mode of like quick consumption and just swiping past stuff quite a bit. So the 1 minute is a great format because you can get right to the heart of the matter. And the other reason, and our friend Dennis Yu talks about this a lot, right? The 1 minute video is not prohibitive for any company to produce that. In fact, he often recommends just get your iPhone out, go into selfie mode, make your 1 minute video that way. And so it emphasizes the fact that we're not trying to overproduce this thing. We're just trying to get value out. In fact, for your audience, if they haven't heard of Dennis, or if they have, one particular tool that he talks about in developing these 1 minute videos is the 3x3 grid. And so that's where you create 3 videos for each of the why, how, and what concepts. And if you Google it, you can learn more about what Dennis talks about there. But it's a way to progress people along in a story-driven format to get people engaged with who you are and really understand what you're about before you make a pitch. And short, sweet, to the point, and not overproduced in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. I think it's just key to being able to produce it. And I know that you mentioned the 3x3 grid, and we'll drop maybe a piece down below to be able to kind of link you to a resource for that as well, for you guys to be able to check that out. But it's so powerful when done correctly to be able to really differentiate yourself between the other brands around you, right? Now, Frank, one of the biggest things that you talk about is branding itself and how you differentiate yourself through branding versus some of the other metrics and chasing the next shiny object. Maybe could you expand a little bit about the importance of a brand and why it's important not to chase that next shiny object?
Well, in the book, Building Your Digital Utopia, one of the points I get to early on is that the thing that's going to help you accelerate past your competitors is brand. And the reason I say that is because we live in a very commoditized world. So in almost every given industry, you can get roughly the same thing at roughly the same price, from a lot of different providers that roughly sound the same, right? You take an industry like digital marketing, for example, an industry that I've been in for a long time, an industry you've been around for a long time. And, there are no shortage of digital marketing firms, and you could hit one on every corner of almost every street. There's no barrier to entry. And so it's created mass saturation in our marketplace. And this is happening in almost every industry. And so when the consumer, the buyer, whoever that is for your industry, has these options where y'all roughly look and sound alike, y'all roughly do the same thing at roughly the same price, then the only way you're going to stand out in there is by developing brand, right? That's how you're going to create that awareness, is by exposing your differentiation and doing so in a way that resonates with very specific audiences. What a lot of people, I think, misunderstand about brand is it's not just like plastering your identity and your core message to the widest audience possible. Developing brand is about becoming the most meaningful to a specific set of audience possible. Mm-hmm. So how can you become most meaningful to a particular audience? That's the how, if you will, or that's the path towards building brand. It's not, mass exposure to the widest group possible. As people, we often feel that way about brand and the efforts around branding, because we see, these brands in our lives that are big and, ever present no matter where we go, the Coca-Colas and the Starbucks and all of this. But for the vast majority of businesses, that's not the approach to brand, right? How can you be more meaningful to a specific audience than your competitors? Or how can you find an audience that is an opportunity for you to be perfectly matched and create more meaning in their lives than anyone else? And so that's the path to brand. And the way we do that today looks a lot different than the way we did this, 20, 30, 50 years ago. And the way we do that today is often through content. It's by providing value. I talked about in one of our last conversations, this idea that the way you serve prospective customers is as if they're already your customers. So what kind of value do you aim to provide to your existing customers or clients or patients or members or students? Bring that same value and that same approach to the general marketplace. By general marketplace, I mean your carved out marketplace. Bring that to them as if they already are. One of my favorite ways to put that is they're already your customers, they just don't know it yet.
Yes.
And so if you wake up and think that way and serve them that way and aim to bring them a disproportionate amount of value compared to what everyone else is doing, you'll build brand, you'll build preference, which then leads to higher conversion rates, leads to higher margins. It leads to better fit customers and clients.
Absolutely. So valuable, guys. That was one of my biggest epiphanies hearing Frank speak just a few weeks ago, was really treating all of your customers and all your prospective clients like they already are customers, right? And just that little nuance and just that little shift in thinking, how different your message is going to be as a result. So instead of sell, and like always trying to push your product, you're actually giving value to them as they already are clients, and you're just serving them at the highest level. And I think that's just phenomenal.
Yeah, you have to think about, not a problem. You have to think about your content that you put out, not just as like content for the Google. Like you have to think about it as one of your product offerings. And the buyers are these people who have one particular relationship with your brand, which is a very light relationship at that point, but it's a relationship nonetheless. Mm-hmm. And the currency, how they're paying for that product, is their time and attention. So just shift your mind. You're not developing this content because you're trying to appease Google and you're trying to just do this stuff called marketing. You're doing that because it's one piece of your product evolution. It's one piece. It's the first piece that has the lowest barrier to entry, but you need to think of it as a product. And the reason you have to think of it that way is because when you develop a product, you think about what? Who's going to buy? What's their pain point? What are the use cases? Why do they need this over any other product out there? What kind of transformation are we trying to bring to their lives? Those are all the same questions that need to be answered if you're going to produce content. So content is a product. You need to produce it with that spirit, because otherwise it's going to be just content you're putting out for Google, and it's not meaningful. You're just trying to, rank on some keyword phrase. But those people who land on that page because of that, they're not going to go anywhere because you didn't create it as a product. You didn't create it with that kind of spirit. And so when you do that, then the exchange, the buy, is their time and attention. Okay. It's one of your paths in that product wheel or product life cycle that you have for your firm.
Yeah, so valuable. And it kind of leads me into the next one, Frank. Obviously, when you're creating this relationship with your potential customers and stuff like that, obviously in a digital world, it's easier doing it face to face. And in a digital world, we're always trying to get back to that human element and that connection mode. So being that we're in the realm and in the space of digital marketing, how do you get those touch points so the consumer on the other end still feels like they're valued on the other end?
I think that's just in how you produce the content and making sure it's extremely narrow. One of the things that we teach at my firm is that your campaigns need to have what's called HyperSpecificity, meaning it needs to be for one persona around one pain point. And if you infuse that through your entire funnel, then all along the way, they're going to feel like the content was made just for them. And if you have really great follow-ups that are logically connected, such that taking the next step makes relational sense, then they're going to feel like they're being catered to one-to-one. One of my favorite marketers and a friend of mine, the CEO of Digital Marketer, Ryan Deiss, he uses a particular phraseology, a construct, a sentence construct, to drive home the point of how you connect, one piece of content to another action, or one action to another action. He says what you basically want to be able to say to people is, now that you've done that, you should do this. And so this is where a lot of people go really wrong when they develop funnels. Even if you look at like your macro funnel, the macro funnel of your business, all along the way, if you can't make that kind of connection, now that you've done that, you should do this, you're going to disrupt that flow. And I see this all the time with businesses and with marketers. They develop funnels where, next to the content they're promoting, the lead magnet has nothing to do with the content. And so that's going to ruin conversion, because it's not a natural logical progression to the relationship, right? You're not able to effectively say, now that you've done that, you should do this. So I like to look at it as like what I call a 1-2 punch, right? The 1-2 punch is this: if you put out a piece of content that's hyper focused on a person around a pain point, and you educate them, then the lead magnet, using that as an example, needs to empower them. It's not more content to be educated with. It's now a tool or resource to empower them to take action. And the reason that's important is so that way in that content, you could say, now that you understand how to do this, I want to help make this easy on you. Get this template to allow you to put everything that you just learned into play. Now that you understand how to look at your finances as a business, the first thing you need to do is audit these general ledger entries. Here is a tool to help you do that, right? So that's what the lead, and most people, this is one of my gripes when it comes to funnels, is most people don't talk about that 1-2 punch. They don't talk about like that connectivity, right? Now that I have the information, here's how to take action, and this is what you should do next, right? Same thing once they're in and you're trying to get them on the phone, you're trying to get them to what I call a foot in the door, right? You show them inspirational content around, something that you do, whether it's a case study or like a deep dive on how you do what you do. And once they're properly inspired, then you could say, hey, would you like that too? Would you like that kind of transformation too? Would you like that to happen in your business, in your life? Then let's get on the phone and let's analyze as a first step, whatever it is, right? Like you connect them. You always connect them. The content gets connected to the action. And that's how you can make people feel like they're being catered to on a one-to-one relationship driven way.
Love that. That's, like I said, just lots of value being dropped, guys. Once again, thank you so much for being on the show. I know the audience is going to take a lot from it as well. Now, I'm curious, as we continue down that road of businesses, a lot of businesses have like the code of honor, or their code of honor on the wall, just saying what we stand for.
Like
right?
their core values or
core
something.
Core values, that's exactly the word I was looking for. How important is that when it comes to creating culture, and who is it important for? Is it important for the team, or is it important more for the consumer, or both?
I help businesses often with all sorts of strategic language within the business, because the strategic language of the business drives different behaviors and decisions for different contexts and purposes. Core values specifically are very important. They do drive culture heavily, but they only drive culture if you're going to hire and fire by them. So if you're not willing to weed out a candidate that you love because they don't match a core value, then you're not going to drive culture that matches those core values. If you're not willing to fire somebody because they violate core values, then you're not going to have a culture that upholds those core values. So it's only as strong as your willingness to adhere to the hire and fire principles. You know, you hire by them and you fire by them. Another phrase that, you know, that I love that helps illustrate this is, you know, how we do anything is how we do everything, which basically says, hey, the lowest common denominator that you're willing to tolerate, you know, kind of dictates the culture. It dictates how everything's going to go. So core values are important, but they need to be more than words on a wall. I'm also a huge fan of when it comes to core values, the fewer the better. You're not going to get your team. I can't tell you how many businesses I've consulted with and they have like 12 core values. Yeah. And so my question back to them is, what are you not? Because essentially what you tried to do is you got together with a committee and no one wanted to hurt anyone's feelings. And so you didn't leave any of the ideas out. And now you have a list of 12 core values. Well, your team's not going to remember those 12 core values, right? They're just not. So I'm a huge fan of 3 or 5. We have 5 at my company. I think that's too much. I think you get it down to 3 core things, in my opinion, so they become pillars for behavior at your organization. And so I use that word behavior very specifically because a lot of times I see companies develop core values and they develop these cute, fun things, which is cool. If it means something to your organization, hey, more power to you. But oftentimes it doesn't tell people about the behavior that's supposed to be expressed at this organization, right? How do you become this brand? How do you live this brand? And that's what your core values are supposed to educate people on at your company. So 3 or 5, keep it simple, make them behavior driven. So that way people can spot it and witness it and see when it's being done right and when it's not being done right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So important and so valuable. I think, you know, even when it comes to a code of honor and values, you know, I've even created one for our family, right? I think it's that important. We've posted it up and stuff like that. We've worked at it as a family together. My kids are young still. They're 6 and 4, right? But it's so important that we know what we stand for at the end of the day. And you're right. When you have too many, you become everything to anyone and you don't attract to everything, and it's hard to really remember those as well. So I think 6, like you said, 6 kind of max is where I like to see it and go from there. Now, speaking about family, I know you have 4 kids. I know you're a busy guy. And like I said, this is really shifting, but how do you really find the balance between the work and family life relationship?
Oh, I'm the wrong guy to ask about that. Just total transparency. You know, I tend to be obsessed with the things that I get into. And so I probably err on the side of being a little out of balance, just in total transparency. But, you know, I think every now and then you kind of just have to take a step back and, like, you know, make time for the things that are out of balance. Mm-hmm. But I think you'll notice that when trying to accomplish, you know, very big things, and it really, and let me say this, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And there's no right or wrong, by the way. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and the degree there within. Mm-hmm. You know, one example I love to use is one of my, you know, like idols is Kobe Bryant, you know, was Kobe Bryant. And if you look at, you know, what he accomplished, he made it to the stratosphere of being considered one of the greatest to ever play the game. You could, I'm sure, argue him, Michael, LeBron, all this stuff, right? But he certainly is up there in that conversation, one of the greatest to ever play the game. But if you look at, like, his life during those 20 years of basketball, there wasn't balance. Like, there wasn't what we would call balance. There was a disproportionate obsession with his craft. And I think what we see that with anybody who's attained that level within their given craft. And so I think everyone just needs to ask themselves, what level do I really want to be at here? And there is no right or wrong. Like, if you decide, no, I'm not trying to play at the Kobe Bryant level of my particular craft, there's nothing wrong with that. This is not like a bad to good kind of measure. It's just a horizontal spectrum. And again, going back to, you know, the Kobe example, I mean, the guy hated you if you showed up on time for practice, right? If you showed up, like, if practice started at 10, he showed up at 9:50, on time, 10 minutes early. He hated you. Why? Because you were doing what the coach told you to do. You weren't doing what your body needed to do, which was show up at 7 a.m., get the workout in, work on the things you know you're deficient at. You were just doing what the boss told you to do. And so Kobe viewed you as just being, a clock in, clock out employee at that level. And he hated you if you took that approach, like hated you. And so that's the kind of thing we're talking about is, you get to determine like what balance looks like for each individual, but it's going to be dictated like where on that, I go left to right, where on that spectrum you want to land in your particular craft and career. If you're like, no, I'm willing, I don't need to end my life, having been, one of the greatest in the game in my craft. I'm willing to be in the middle of the pack because I'm not willing to do then that's great. Then there's nothing wrong with that. But I think each person has to decide where along that spectrum they want to land. And then the balance is going to come accordingly, right? Like if you're not going to be in the kind of the middle of the pack, then you're not going to have balance in some way, right? If you're going to be over here on the one end where you're kind of like, hey, I'm not really looking to break any records, then you can disproportionately spend a lot of time on your boat with your family, right? But if you're over on the other end where you're like, I'm going to be the best in our industry, then you're probably going to be a little bit of out of balance on the family side and the hobby side. So I think everyone just has to decide where do they want to land in that spectrum when it comes to their career.
Absolutely. I appreciate your complete honesty there as well. And I really, at the end of the day, I don't really think there is such thing as that work-family life balance. I think there's always something that takes a little bit more precedent. And usually when someone is trying to build a business, I do find that usually ends up kind of consuming them as well, right?
I mean, look, if any of your listeners today are just starting out, the look in the mirror, raw truth is you're going to have to be out of balance. You're going to have to spend a disproportionate amount of time trying to build this thing and get this thing off the ground, because the inertia you have to overcome to not only get a business going, but then to make it past 5 years is immense. That inertia is immense, like that you have to overcome, because the vast majority of businesses fail, 95%, plus, and 95+% won't make it past 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. And by the way, that same kind of percentage, if you do make it, means you have a 95% chance you won't make it to $1 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. Right. So the odds are really, truly against you. Like if you just if you were playing the odds, if you were going to bet and we were in Vegas, like you wouldn't bet on that number. You'd bet on this other number, right? And so if you're starting out, if you want to talk about work balance, like you shouldn't start a business. Like you should go work for somebody if that's your number one priority. Again, there's no right or wrong here.
Right.
It just depends on what you want. But I think anyone who makes the decision, I'm going to start a business, you got to look in the mirror and not be naive and not fool yourself. Like this is going to require a disproportionate amount of your time.
Absolutely. Now, talking about starting a business and everything else, what do you see is the biggest pitfall that new agency owners run into? What's the biggest mistake that they make?
Well, there's several. Okay. So probably the number one is not enough selling. Just plain and simple, not enough selling. I think this industry attracts a lot of people who are technically adept at the work, but not necessarily business savvy people, and people that are hungry for the business side of a business. They're hungry for the technical side of the business, the work side, but not the business side and all the things that it takes to make the business go. So number one is not enough selling. And I think most small business owners don't sell enough. They don't ingrain it within their teams. They don't ingrain it within their culture. It's not a mindset. So that's number one. The second biggest mistake agencies make is that they end up selling too many things to too many different people.
Being too much.
And the problem with that is the broader the service items you're willing to take on, the harder it is to grow that firm. It becomes exponentially harder because, in marketing, as marketers, we often get caught up in this trap because there's a lot that falls under the umbrella of marketing, right? Under the umbrella of marketing, you've got strategy, project management, copywriting, design, technical implementation, working with ad platforms, right? I've just named 6 skill sets off the top of my head, and there's several more. And when you try to build a business with 6 to 10 different skill sets, and it's human-based, it's labor-based, like growing that is extremely difficult because you need experts in all of those areas. So instead, what us agency owners do when we're starting out is we fool ourselves and we say, you know what, I'm going to get the strategist who's also going to PM and copyright. That's the job description I'm going to put out, which is just crazy to think that person exists. The person that ends up taking that role, is going to burn out because they're not an expert in any one of those things. Or if they're really good in one, they definitely suck in the other two. So that's what we do as small business owners, is we often think that we can have people wear multiple hats and do multiple jobs. And it's just, it makes for a terrible employee experience, and it makes for a terrible client product. Mm-hmm. And so what I tell agency owners is solve a specific problem for a specific audience with as few skill sets as possible. Go do that thought exercise first. Go do that those mental gymnastics to figure that out. Who's an audience that has a problem that you can uniquely solve with as few skill sets as possible? If you can nail that, you're going to create something that's going to grow much easier than if you just say, oh, we're digital marketing. We're digital marketing. We're going to handle your digital marketing. There's a ton of things you're going to do under digital marketing. And so the number of skill sets required becomes 6, 8, 10 skill sets, right? Like we do fairly well at our agency. We're a multi-million-dollar firm, but I got to tell you, if I had to do this all over again, I'd go find something where there's 2 skill sets required to deliver on the promise. That's it. There would be some sort of strategy person and some sort of implementer person. That's it. And this is, so take it from me. I've been in this game for going on close to 20 years now. And so the reason I say that is because I know how hard it is to grow a company when you literally have 6, 8, 10 different skill sets. It's the math isn't in your favor. Let's just put it that way.
Absolutely. And I took notes during that, and I'm definitely going to implement what you just said there. Being a new agency owner myself and moving into that realm, it's quite interesting, the different things that people have to pay attention to when moving forward. So I appreciate your insight there. I know we've run over a little bit here on time. I have one more question. I want to get to the book. You mentioned Kobe Bryant a little bit earlier. Obviously, mentorship was key to him. Mentorship's been key to a lot of people. What is the purpose of a mentor, and why have a mentor?
Well, so here's the thing. You don't know what you don't know. Right. And I spent many years not realizing there was a whole blind area that you're not even aware of. Right. So there's this, right? You know what you know what you don't know. And then you don't know what you don't know. And that's a blind area. And so a mentor is really important because a mentor can point those things out, and a mentor can talk about their experiences and how they've solved problems that you're going through. And they can be, this outside set of eyes and ears that isn't in your day-to-day business. And they're not bogged down and clouded by all the details. They just have a very high level view. And so a good mentor will get to understand not only your business, but more importantly, a good mentor understands your personality and what your patterns are. And that's what a good mentor will do, is they're going to look for your patterns. So that way they can point that out, and they might say, Sheldon, do you realize that over the past 2 years, this is the 4th time you've done X? And you might go, holy shit, no, I did not realize it. And then they would say something like, now, why are you doing that? Do you think that's because you truly haven't figured it out yet? Or do you think that you're focusing on the wrong things? Or do you think you're trying to sabotage yourself? Right? And so they'll be able to ask questions, right? And so a good mentor recognizes those patterns, but then they ask questions so that way you can start to explore and grow, right? And figure those things out. As opposed to a coach, where a coach is supposed to point those things out and saying, hey, you did this, go do it this way better next time, right? That's kind of like the nuance between a coach and a mentor.
Absolutely. Great stuff.
But it's really important because, again, you don't know what you don't know. You're never going to see it. There's a great exercise that we do in one of my business groups called a Johari window. You can look it up. I'm sure there's videos of it online. A Johari window exercise is where you sit down in a chair and in front of a group of some very close confidants, some business associates, if you will, or friends or family, depending on what the issue is. You would talk about an issue you're experiencing, and you would answer a number of different questions. Here's the background, here's what's happening, here's what it's causing, here's the impact, here's what I've done before, here's what I think I might do next, here's why this bothers me so, here's what I think failure looks like in this situation. So you just answer these questions, and you talk about this in front of everyone. And then, the group gets to ask you just a couple of questions just for clarification, not to solve your problem, but just to ask. And once that's done, you turn around, you turn your back to this group, and they literally talk about you behind your back, and they talk to each other. And, they say things like, I wonder if he realizes this is the fourth time he's done this. Right. And so these people talk to each other behind your back. And so that's an exercise to expose your blind spots. And it's extremely powerful. If you ever have a group of people that, you're close enough with and you trust enough to do this kind of exercise, it'll be one of the greatest gifts that you'll ever receive.
Wow, that's super powerful. Not only do you get to hear like what you're missing, but you also kind of get to build that the level of having people talk behind your back, right? So you get to build that self-confidence as well. Now, Frank, last thing I want to talk to you, Building Your Digital Utopia, phenomenal book. I've had an opportunity. It just came yesterday. I've already 3/4 of the way through it. So I found it very, very fascinating. Tell the audience what they're going to get in this book and why you decided to write it.
Okay, first disclaimer. This is not a book for digital marketers. In fact, it's mostly not a book for marketers. It's a book for the executive crowd. And I wrote it for the executive crowd because the executive crowd has been misled and has had a sour taste in their mouth when it comes to digital marketing. And we as digital marketers have to take responsibility for that, right? And so what I want the executive crowd to understand is the way you go about strategic digital marketing actually harkens back to a lot of fundamentals you already understand. The fundamentals of building brand, the fundamentals of building relationships. And so if you can understand that, and then I give you a very easy to understand format for how you can then apply that to a funnel, quote unquote, then you're going to be able to wrap your mind around digital marketing better than you ever have before. And you're going to be able to guide your team on the direction of where you're supposed to be going with your digital. And so that's why I wrote the book. That's who I wrote the book for. If you're a marketer, you probably are going to get a ton out of it, but don't read it thinking that you're going to learn like the latest Facebook algo hack. I don't speak on stage about the tactical stuff. And in my book, I don't jump into the tactical stuff. I wrote it so that way an executive crowd can go, you know what? I understand digital now. And I understand how it's going to be a strategic tool for us to help us build our brand and drive growth for our organization.
Mm-hmm. And as a digital marketer, I'll just one step on that as well, as I found it very fascinating and how I could relate my business to what they're looking for and their pain points and their needs. So that's where I found it very fascinating, and how I can adjust even what I do to match some of your core principles that are mentioned in the book. So Frank, it's been my pleasure today to have you on. Like I said, I know we went way over time. Where do we find you, Frank?
Just shoot me an email. Easiest thing, just shoot me an email. If you want to get in touch with me personally, just send me an email to my personal, frankcowell@gmail.com. If you want to check out my business and you're interested in hiring our firm, digitopia.agency, digitopia.agency. Again, if you're just interested in chatting with me personally, frankcowell@gmail.com.
Fantastic. You can find him on social as well. He's in all of them as well. So some great videos.
At Frank Cowell. Yeah.
You bet. He has some great 1-minute videos. I love the one about your dad and the three keys and that he taught you as well. So just love it. So thanks so much, Frank. Appreciate you coming on today, and we'll see you soon.
All right, Sheldon. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.